What's a work-related accident that still haunts you to this day? Work in a dealership, and once a tech was using a tool that broke free, bashing him in the face, knocking out multiple teeth, splitting his lip, and breaking his nose. It was a bloody mess. Young kid, with balls of steel apparently. While waiting for an ambulance he was sitting there talking, and smiled to show the damage. That smile was horrifying. Recovered and got a ton of dental work and still works there. One of the lads on the shift before my shift was cut in half by a basket of scrap metal, 50 ton. He was a good lad. Even 20 years later it makes me feel sad. I was a cashier in a grocery store. One of my fellow cashiers was a senior, just killing time in retirement. One day, she had a dizzy spell, collapsed, cracked her head open on the floor. Paramedics were called, and as they were loading her into the ambulance, she was crying out that she could still finish her shift. While building Levy Stadium, a trucker was unloading rubber when the entire pile fell on him, impaling him multiple times, and also crushing him. I never met the man, but a cat and elderly dog ended up at a local shelter. We planned to adopt the dog, and ended up taking home the cat too because we didn't want to split them. Nina, the dog, passed away in her sleep in 2017, about 2 years after we brought her home. Seal, the cat, is around 7 years old now, and doing just fine. I've always wondered if they ever thought of him. I think it was the day before Thanksgiving 2012. There was a news story about a guy trying to reach something off of a platform at a local paper mill. He fell into a nearly boiling hot tank of caustic solution with spinning blades in it. There was absolutely nothing left. I have worked over those exact tanks numerous times. It's an old facility, but if you don't follow their safety policies right down to the T, they will throw you out in a heartbeat. That's just a terrible way to go on one of the worst days that it could happen if the year. I think about it often. Trench collapse. Guy was pinned mid-chest. Not good but not immediately fatal. Guy's coworkers freak out and use the backhoe to dig him out. Ended up catching him with the teeth on the bucket. Essentially cut him in half. The guy on the backhoe was his brother. Dude would have probably been alright had they rescued him the right way. The time we almost killed a customer at the restaurant I worked at. He had a milk allergy that we didn't know about, so we made his food on the same grill as everything else. Apparently his allergy was severe enough that he spent the weekend in the hospital because of anaphylaxis from cross-contamination. He was super nice about it and acknowledged that he really should have told us. He remained a regular for the 2+ years that I continued working there, and our systems changed drastically to accommodate allergies. I used to fly small airplanes in Northwest Alaska. In the 2 years I worked there I knew 3 pilots that died in crashes. Don't miss how those days felt. Not me, but at the cookie factory where my brother worked, a worker died when someone accidentally dumped out a massive mixer full of molasses on top of him. He suffocated before they could dig him out. Was a banquet server. Getting my pocket hooked to the knob on the door and ripping my pants almost clean off as I walked out into the banquet hall full of people. Not really haunted, but we had a guy in the army violate one of the cardinal rules of working in the motor pool, remove watches, rings, and dog tags. He had kept his wedding ring on and was working in the turret of an Avenger surface-to-air missile launching system mounted on a HMMWV. When he climbed down the tiny ladder at the back he decided to jump down the last few feet to the ground. His ring caught on the ladder and gloved his finger. He held up his hand and just looked at it and said, We grabbed him, wrapped his hand, not much blood honestly, and took him to the hospital. All the while another soldier was carrying the fleshy remnant in his hands and dry heaving. Once he was taken in at the hospital they just removed the finger. He became a cautionary tale for all my future soldiers. I worked with a machine called a microtome. It slices biological samples to a cell depth so they can be stained. It does this by raising and lowering the sample against a mounted razor blade. You keep your fingers so far out of the way. After the multiple people who lost fingertips, slashed their knuckles, sliced through nails. It's a horrible way to injure yourself, because the cut is so clean it takes a second to realize you've just skinned yourself. Engineer decided to open a parcel with a Stanley knife, not sure if he slipped or what angle he was cutting at, but bam. Stanley knife in the eye. Never saw him again, but H&S quickly introduced a policy that safety goggles needed to be worn when opening boxes. Coworker, who was fresh out of trade school, was using a table saw to cut 1-inch thick sheets of plastic into strips. It was cold, so he put on some leatherwork gloves. A glove got caught and pulled his hand into the saw, nearly severing his right index and middle fingers. He came to me and said, "I think I cut my hand." It literally looked like a package of pork ribs or mangled bone and tissue. They were able to save the fingers, but they are non-functional and don't bend.